Hi, Judy. Welcome. We'll start in just a moment. I'm getting Zoom and YouTube started here. Hi, Sue. Welcome. I'm getting things set up. We'll start in just a moment. I'm sitting at my dining room table tonight with 3/4 of the Elwoods, Robert and Gracia Faye and Faye. Richard is still in Ojai. And let's see, okay. YouTube is started. And we've got Zoom on here. Hi, Megan, welcome. Hi, John. I was just saying I'm here, if you haven't heard, I'm here with Faye and her parents, Robert and Gracia Faye Elwood. Faye is gonna help me with Psalm 139 tonight. And Robert and Gracia Faye may or may not say something, depending on whether they are moved, which is the way Gracia Faye operates anyway. She's Quaker, so she speaks when she's moved to do so. And Robert speaks when a university administrator tells him to, so.
I did.
So we'll begin in just a moment. We're in Psalm 139 tonight, Psalm chapter 139. Faye is joining us because she's preaching this Sunday at Pilgrim Congregational Church. And she is more the expert in Hebrew Bible studies than me. So I'm always very glad to have her along when we're studying the Old Testament. And there's Finian in the other room. Yes, Finian, I'm online now.
Almost. Be right there.
Oh, mommy's bringing you some dinner?
Yeah.
Okay.
You can start.
Well, wait, we got another, I know we have another minute. It's only 5:44, so we'll wait another minute or two before. It looks like, is that Cedric on Zoom? Cedric, are you on Zoom and unable to unmute yourself? You did it right this morning. Pretty sure that's Cedric, but I can't hear him, so I can't confirm that it's him. So we'll begin in just a moment. For those of you interested, the dog and the cats are still alive. And we haven't had it hasn't been too terribly difficult because we've kept them separated pretty well. And we're a little concerned about how Toby might react. Some are more concerned than others, but so far he's doing okay. He's barking every now and then, scares them, I think, but he's doing okay. All right, let's go ahead. Oh, hi,
this is Cedric.
Yeah, now I can hear.
And Lorraine's coming on soon. Yeah, I was handling two phones at the same time. That's quite difficult.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, welcome, Lorraine. Welcome, Cedric. If you didn't hear me earlier, I'm sitting at our dining room table with Faye and her parents, Robert and Gracia Faye. And as I mentioned, that's three-fourths of the family Elwood. The son Richard is not here; he still lives in Ojai. John mentions prayers this evening for the Equabel family. Andrew's uncle-in-law died yesterday morning from COVID effects. I'm so sorry to hear that, John. Yes, I saw your Facebook post about that, actually. Very, very sorry. Thoughts with Andrew and his wife and wife family.
Can you repeat the name? Can you repeat the
Name
name?
is Equabel is the last name, Equibel. And there is there's Guadalupe. Hi, Guadalupe.
Hi, Dr. Patrick, and hi, everyone.
All right, so let's get started. Oh, Mom joined on. Hi, Mom, welcome. So we've got a pretty good crowd tonight. I'm sitting at the table with 3 Elwoods. So there are four here at the dining room table. Finian's in the next room. And we've got 3 on Zoom, Cedric, Guadalupe, and Lorraine. And we've got about 5 or 6 on Facebook. My mom and John Olson and Megan Olson, Sue Selters, and Judy Burton from Prattville or Montgomery. All right. Nice to have you all here. We're in Psalm 139 tonight, and we're going to read through it in sections because it divides fairly well into 4 sections. And so we're going to focus on those sections. The first 6 verses. Let's see if I can find, oh, right, I'm looking at the wrong page. Here we go. The first, where did it go? Now I've lost my notes. That's not good. Oh, right. Gotta go. All right. Right. The first 6 verses focus on God's knowledge of the psalmist actions, thoughts, and words. And then question 7 introduces a new section, which is a question. Verse 7, I should say, introduces a question, which is where can I go? Where can I flee to escape God's presence? And verses 8 through 12 is the response. So we'll look at verses 7 through 12. Verses 13 and through 18 connect God's creative power with God's knowledge of the psalmist. And then verses 19 through 24 mark a shift, an important shift, as the wicked and the bloodthirsty are introduced in verses 19. And these are, of course, the enemies of both the psalmist and of God. And there's a strong contrast that the psalmist draws between the rebellious behavior of those enemies with the psalmist's loyalty to God. So there's this emphasis on the loyalty of the psalmist. So let's read 139, 1 through 6, and jump into a discussion. As usual, Faye and I both encourage you to jump in with questions and comments, and we would love to hear what you have to say about things. And so please do so. All right, this is Psalm 139, 1 through 6, and I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. All right, so the very first word of this psalm, like many other psalms, is O Lord, which is the usual translation, and is true in this case as well, the translation of the divine name Yahweh. And the first verse, or that's the first word, and then the first word of verse 2 is you, meaning speaking of God in the second, addressing God in the second person, you. And this psalm really emphasizes the nature of the relationship between God and the psalmist. And it really tells us a whole lot about the psalmist understanding of that relationship, of God's relationship to the psalmist. And it's characterized in terms of knowledge, but it is a knowledge that is unlike human knowledge in many important respects. And so these first 6 verses really emphasize this, as I said, the nature of this relationship. And you have in verse 1, you have the verb to know, and you have then God's knowledge of the psalmist's deeds, thoughts, and words even before they are spoken. The psalmist says that such knowledge, and again, I think there's some qualification here, and the psalmist actually tries to make this qualification that it's clearly the sort of knowledge that the psalmist does not have access to. It's too wonderful, which is a kind of language of praise. And then he says that I cannot attain to it. I think that it's best to understand this expression from the psalmist as expression of praise. That is, I think the psalmist is much more concerned about expressing in poetic language the nature of this relationship with God. And the psalmist is not so concerned about laying out the rational boundaries of God's knowledge, which is how we would be tempted to do with these verses, and in fact has been done with these verses, I think, in a way that really distorts chapter 139. So this chapter is used in a lot of theological text to try to justify and explain the doctrine of omniscience, that is an all-knowing God, the doctrine of omnipresence, that is of an all-present God. And I'm not necessarily opposed to those efforts, but I think we should be very clear that that is not what the psalmist is doing. That is, the psalmist is not writing doctrine for us. The psalmist is writing poetry that's primarily in the language of praise and this divine relationship. So I think that's a very important point to make about the entire chapter, but particularly these first few verses, so that when the psalmist, and I say he, making an assumption there that might not be warranted, but the psalmist is saying, when the psalmist says, I cannot attain to it, the psalmist is expressing not that it's up here and I can't get there, but more like, it's more like there's no way,
I can't wrap my head around it.
I can't wrap my head around it. Right. It's more like that. Anyway, that's those are my thoughts about the first 6 verses. Faye, what would you like to add to that?
Can you just pull them up right there?
What's it? Yeah, there they are.
One thing I love about this psalm is just the progression of it. As you said, it starts with knowing sort of the basic movements of the speaker. It starts with, you've searched me and known me. And we want to remember that, because at the end, the psalmist will ask God to sort of search and know him again. So it's almost as if this is something that doesn't just happen the once, that it's, something that's continuing to happen, and something that the psalmist, the human, plays a role in, because it's involved in prayer. So, when I sit down, when I rise up, when I'm getting up, when I'm going to bed, you discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. So, sort of my nature. And searching out my path, I think, fits in with this idea that we'll hear again, is about God playing a role in sort of having plans for individuals, which is different from saying, I know everything that's going to happen, and here it is. But it's like, I have a care and a concern for your future and for what you do with your life. And I love this. Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely. Like this idea, like, what's that word? Wait, don't tell me, that when I'm in that sort of, even sort of slightly frustrated place, nothing, dire, God knows that word. God has that kind of intimacy. It's almost as if God is like inside your mouth, knowing that word. Then there is, you hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. I always think of my mom with that line, because they have several cats, and when there's a couple cats on the bed, she says, you hem me in behind and before, I am beset before by cats. And I think that's such a cute image. And so there's this sort of about moving, right? Like when I'm up and when I'm down, when you're sort of all around me. And again, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it. Like I can't, the fact that you're so present in my life in all of these ways. I mean, I can say it, I can put it into a poem to the best of my ability, but ultimately it is beyond my logical reasoning, like anything that I can fathom, like we said before. Hard to wrap your head around it.
I like your point about God having plans for us, and that sort of expresses not so much about detail. I remember as a college student arguing with other college students about whether God knew that I was going to have cornflakes for breakfast, for example, and that sort of thing. And I think that that's how it can become silly in a way.
Yeah,
that is, and trivializes it, right? That this knowing has to do with God's goodness and justice and God's love, and that it's related to all of those things.
It seems to me that it's really speaking, as you said, not so much God as a God of all power or all knowledge, so much as a God of love.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that if love means anything, it means the ability to to some extent at least, see the world through somebody else's eyes, to share in someone else's life on a inward subjective level as well
That's
as
good.
outwardly. We can only do it very imperfectly, of course, but it can be the case that people that are deeply in love, whether lovers or a parent and child, really know what the other is thinking before they say anything, have a sense of where they're at in terms of their inwardness at that point. And what the psalm is really saying is that God, with his more perfect love, knows us in that same way, but much more fully and deeply. And so I would say that it's really not so much a matter of God's power or knowledge, but love.
Yeah.
I like that,
I
Dad.
completely agree with that. I think that's excellent. And in fact, that's how so many of the early Christians thought of this as well. And if you look at the writings of the early Christians and then the mystics of the medieval period, they talk so much about knowledge, the knowledge of God really being at the level of passionate love, of a deep passionate love. And that there's this really important image of love enabling one to go beyond rational knowledge. That is, you have a love that carries you beyond simply knowing things like what I had for breakfast this morning, right? That you know someone in a sense that you care for them.
Right.
Yeah.
And that it's there for you. It suddenly made me think, isn't that a hymn, Mom? Oh, love that will not let me go.
Yes, that's one of my
Yeah.
favorites. Yes.
George, what was the name of the poet?
I don't remember.
George
George Herbert?
No,
No.
No, but his fiancée had died,
Ah,
and this was sort of a cry of his heart.
Oh,
yeah.
He had lost his love, and yet he was carried on, you might say, in the love that would not let him go.
Oh, that's beautiful.
We should request that hymn for this Sunday.
That's
I
right.
love that hymn. Oh, love that will not let me go. It's a
Yeah,
great,
that'd be
great
very
hymn.
appropriate.
Yeah.
My sister wanted that sung at her funeral.
Oh, that's a good idea. Maybe I should request that too.
All right.
All right. Any questions or comments about those other comments about those first 6 verses?
Well,
Yes,
I
Gracia
have
Faye.
something. I think what the psalmist is saying is that God, your consciousness and ours are united. I mean, they're fused. And yet at the same time, we're two and we're one at the same time. And this is a mystery that we cannot put into words.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think that what you have for breakfast can make a difference if you happen to be eating something that's toxic.
Okay.
God knows that too, and God's love is concerned about that.
All right. That's fair.
So you can't really
Yeah.
define high and wonderful from the very, very trivial
Okay.
things.
All right.
Someone else had a
Yes,
comment.
Lorraine.
Patrick,
Yeah, go ahead, Lorraine.
I had the thought of DNA, the way the parts of it are wrapped around one another in a spiral.
Uh-huh.
They're connected like staircases. This poet's trying to explain something that even though God, this God who put him together, is in him like he's totally part of him, and yet he made him, and he's given him all this love to spread out in the world, and like DNA, like a spiral that's twisted and has little ladders that attach both sides at the same time,
Well-
and they wrap around one another.
That's
Yeah.
a nice image.
That is a very good image, and there are, of course, we're learning more and more, aren't we, about the ways that we're connected with one another, that the various biological issues that connect us, and now, of course, even the internet across the world.
We can't really escape God.
No, right.
Futile to try, really.
Achieve. Get reached.
All right. So let's move on to the question in verse 7 and the response to the question in verses 8 through 12.
So beautiful.
This is Faye's favorite part, so she's going to read it.
Oh, okay. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you.
All right. That's some powerful stuff there.
Show enough.
So, right. So one of the interesting terms used here is the term spirit. And you've heard me talk about this term before and how from the creation story and many other passages, we know that the word translated as spirit here is ruach, which can also be translated as wind. And this, I believe, this word really gets, this is the word that really identifies the nature of the relationship. That is, that the relationship is a spiritual one, that it is God's presence, but it's God's presence as spirit, which means that it must be connected to love and goodness and justice and the rest. And so the psalmist is I should mention here too that if I ascend to heaven, you are there. That's the easy part. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. That actually contradicts the common understanding of Sheol, which is that Sheol is the place that God is not present in. It's the very definition of Sheol is that God is not there.
This psalm's a game changer.
This psalm is a game changer. So tell us.
Oh, no, you just did.
Oh,
That's
I just
fine.
did. Okay. So, right, that this is a strong contrast with the accepted understanding of Sheol. Earlier this week, I guess it was as long ago as yesterday, Cedric pointed out that in his translation was very different, and particularly in verse 9. And we talked a little bit after the devotional about how difficult it is to translate poetry from one language to another. And many scholars, particularly language scholars, Hebrew language scholars, will argue that the Psalms is the most difficult book in the Old Testament to translate. And a lot of it simply has to do with the way any poetry is difficult to translate. A lot of it just has to do with the use of images and analogies and words that can be used in multiple ways. And of course, in poetry, often that is intentional, right? That is, a word is intentionally used because it has 2 or 3 or 4 different meanings. And that can get easily lost when you're trying to translate. Verse 9 may be that sort of case. The New Revised Standard Version actually explicitly, in its translation of the Psalms, to keep things as simple and direct as possible. So it's certainly trying to convey the poetry here, but there are all kinds of Hebrew words at work here that that might not capture everything. So if I take the wings of the morning, I mean, I think the literal Hebrew there is the east, right? I think the word that's being used there is the east, and settle at the farthest limits of the sea. In fact,
I'm gonna check that by Sunday.
okay. In fact, Cedric, if you're on there, do you have your Jerusalem Bible and want to read that verse 9 that you have?
He's got a ton of Bibles here. He's gonna look now.
Well, while you're looking it up, can you put that back
Yeah,
on?
right.
What I am so moved by really is the beauty of the poetry. And I think it's valuable that this is phrased in such a sort of beautiful way. I'm not matching the beauty of these lines and how I'm trying to explain it. The poet could have just said, if I go really far, you're still there. But the poet instead said, if I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. I mean, the beauty of the poetry to me is a gesture toward the indescribability of God's sort of omnipresence here, that it's doing more than just functioning for aesthetic purposes. At the same time as it does that, it sort of, I think, sort of almost elevates our response as we hear something melodic, something that's sort of out of the ordinary, which I would say, to go with what you were saying, Dad, about love, that it sort of like puts us on this slightly different plane of functioning than if someone's just sort of saying something straightforward and direct.
Absolutely.
So it's sort of, the poet is sort of lifting us toward this kind of, I don't know.
It also has a common Hebrew poetry way of repeating a line in slightly different words.
Yeah.
For emphasis.
Yeah, that's right.
I've got the Jerusalem Bible now.
Okay, what's the verse 9 say, Cedric?
If I flew to the point of sunrise, comma, or westward across the sea, comma, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good.
That's
Then what about Sheol?
and
Very clearly east and west.
right. And yes, go ahead, Lorraine.
Patrick, could I say something?
Yes,
There's the I can't remember the name of it, but when it talks about Jesus' death, it says in the three nights or days that he was after he was killed, it says he descended into hell. That's in the I don't know whether it's the Apostles' Creed or what. I can't remember, but it says he descended into hell, and on the third day he rose again from the dead. So that's really been a stickler in my mind for a long time.
The Sheol is not the same as the Christian idea of hell.
Right.
At all. It's just a place of kind of rest where everybody goes after death, not really very clearly defined in most of the Hebrew scriptures.
It's kind of the way that the Hebrew Bible talks about Sheol is that it's a place of shadows. It's a place of the shadows of those who lived. So it's to indicate a faint existence, and it is a little different from the notion of the. It's quite different actually from the notion of Gehenna in the New Testament, which is translated as hell, which was a garbage heap outside of Jerusalem that was perpetually burning.
Mom, did you?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a little ways back. It had to do with the fact that this poet probably lived at the time when the general conception of what the relationship between God and their land was changing.
Yes.
Because you remember Jonah tried to escape from God.
Yes.
Mhm.
And he found out that God was also in the middle of the sea.
Mhm.
And when the mariners, the sailors threw him overboard, God had prepared this Leviathan, a great fish, to
Right.
swallow him up and keep him, and then later spat him out. And then he goes to Nineveh after all, and God speaks to him, shouldn't I spare Nineveh?
Mhm.
So God is there.
Mm.
God cares about our enemies.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And he's saying, even if I go down to the land of the dead, where we're only shadows,
Mhm.
in fact, God is.
Ah,
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
well,
that's nice.
if you accept that God is infinite, then God is everywhere by definition. I think that was coming to be more and more realized.
Yeah, especially, of course, this is post-Babylonian
Yes,
exile
right.
that this was written. And of course, the Hebrew people had already been dealing very thoroughly with this idea of what it means to worship God and serve God in a foreign country, right?
Mhm.
True.
Outside of Jerusalem. All right. Megan had a point. If I'm getting that it doesn't matter how far you go or where you end up, God will be there. You're supported, loved, and protected.
Yeah, that's nice, Megan.
Thank you,
Mhm.
Megan. Yeah, I think that's right. And this the psalmist, it's the poetry. And Megan will appreciate this because she's a poetry lover. Uh, it's the poetry of it that tries to make certain that we're connected with that latter part of your statement, Megan. So when you say,
I can't turn it on.
sounds like the ice cream truck.
so Megan, when your first part of your statement is more like where we are, and the second part is that being supported, loved, and protected. I think that's what lies behind the poetry of the language.
Yeah, and I think, Megan, that's part of why this psalm is so progressive. That God, it sounds a lot more like what we think of when we think of a relationship with God. That God is there and protecting us and present with us, even if we're not in Jerusalem, even if we're at the farthest limits of the sea, because this God was thought of as being in Jerusalem, and this is changing.
That also fits in with the omniscience of God and the fact that God searches and knows all of us.
Yeah.
Because God is present in the consciousness of our enemies, only, especially if they're doing really evil things. We don't
Protecting us is the big one.
realize there.
Right.
Right.
They don't experience that consciously, that fusion of their consciousness with God, but it is there nonetheless that God loves them,
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah,
as
I
he
think-
or she loves us.
Yeah, that's nice, Mom.
That's very good. I think that's one of the things we talked about in the devotional as well, is that this is characteristic of the human relationship with God, and that for those of us who are believers, I think that means that we ought to assume that God's Spirit is with others wherever we see them, whatever context they're in, that by their very nature of being human, that they have this kind of relationship with God as well, even whether they recognize it or not in some sense. And that's simply the same thing as saying, I think that human beings are spiritual beings. Yes.
God is everywhere. God is also infused with our consciousness. God is also fused with the consciousness of the animals. So therefore, I see very clearly, I believe very strongly is the spirit, and they contain the spirit and the light of God.
Certainly that would be consistent with the language of creation in the Old Testament and the New Testament. All right.
I have to say, I'm definitely for that. I agree with that one.
I thought you might like
Sure.
that, Maureen.
Yeah. One last comment. I just really like the verse 12, that even the darkness is not dark to you. I mean, there's a time when all of us are scared in the dark, and just in a very literal sense, I like the idea that darkness isn't like darkness to God, so if we're feeling scared in the dark, literally or maybe figuratively, that God isn't scared in that way. I just think that's nice.
Right.
Because
Great
he or
comfort.
she is there.
Yeah, because God is just there, and God isn't functioning on planes of darkness like we are, like where there's such a contrast. I think that's a comforting one for children too.
It's in the dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The darkness of the dark night is like the light, and the light is like the darkness.
Yeah, very good.
Megan says, you talk about this being written in a post-Babylonian exile time. I would imagine that the people were still very wary of being heard again. Yeah, I think so too. That's thoughtful insight, Megan.
Mhm.
Very good, Megan. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to verses 13 through 18 now. And remember, this is the section that is going to connect God's creativity, that is, God as creator, to the psalmist.
Okay. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. I try to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end. I am still with you.
More beautiful poetry. When I hear this this verse too, though, I can't help but think of your story of Richard when he was a toddler.
Which story?
Can we tell that
Yeah.
one? So particularly verse 14, where the psalmist says, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. Do you remember, Richard, the story?
Richard asked you, Mommy, why did God make my beautiful body? That's my brother. It's so cute.
It must have been about a year and a half or two.
It's
Yeah.
about 2, yeah.
Yeah,
So thoughtful.
very, very good. So yes, this is the part that in which the psalmist connects the relationship to the creator, to God as creator. And it also emphasizes again the what I keep wanting to call the I-thou relationship, there was a famous Jewish theologian by the name of Martin Buber writing in the early to mid 20th century. And he had a book called I and Thou, which was a very influential theological work. And in that work, he emphasizes this very issue, that is that that human life is not simply biological, that human life is spiritual, and that it is spiritual by virtue of this relationship with God, between the I and the thou. The verb that's translated formed is used elsewhere of God's gracious activity of constituting the whole people. So it's actually found in Exodus and Psalms and Deuteronomy as well. And God's creation of Israel is also proclaimed elsewhere as one of God's wonderful works in both Exodus and the Psalms, Psalm 77. And as Robert emphasized earlier, this section also describes God's creation of an individual human being, affirms God's loving care for every person. That is that, and I think this is, even if only by analogy, I think this is something we can relate to as as parents. That is, those of us who are parents that have that kind of relationship with a child, that is that kind of care and concern. And this is why human beings are so frequently referred to as the children of God, because of that kind of care and concern that we know that parents have for children. And then it's interesting, the concept of the
depths of the earth.
yeah, you want to talk about that, which is from verse 15.
Oh, I was just going to look at the notes. You had here.
Yeah. Well, my frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. So yeah, tell us about the depths
Well,
of
it
the
says
earth.
here that it is possible that depths of the earth is a metaphor for the womb. And I've heard that as well, or perhaps alludes to ancient Near Eastern mythic material in which human beings originated from below the earth. But I've been taught mostly as it being meeting the womb in a sense, sort of in the depths, in the deep. Yeah. And this says here, which is interesting, is God is not just an observer. God is ultimately in control of the process. In keeping with the weaver image of verse 13, God is the one who has intricately woven the psalmist together. But it's kind of, you can see the psalm now is growing sort of more abstract. So we start out with like, God, you know, when I sit up, when I stand up, and when I lie down. So it's sort of up and down motion. Then we have the second section where there's sort of horizontal. Even if I go all the way to the east and all the way to the west, this is still stuff we can kind of wrap our head around, but already the psalmist says he cannot. Now it's going inward, and it's going even more sort of like not only more abstract in terms of concept, but we're moving around in time. We're going back to when, before the psalmist was even formed. God, you knew me, you put me together. This word, my unformed substance, in Hebrew is, what is it, golmi? It's kind of like where we get this idea of a golem, or sort of this like formed creature that I think Tolkien had in mind when naming Gollum. But that's another discussion. That this idea that God knew everything in the, what is it, in the book?
In your book were written all the days that were formed for me.
Yeah, this is one where you really need to look at some different translations and look at the Hebrew, because sometimes in this translation, it seems as if God knows everything that's going to happen in my life, literally. But I think a look at the Hebrew yields more of a reading of, you have plans for me. Again, connecting with this idea of plans for before, to live a life of goodness, of love, and of compassion. And I think that's a little more harmonious with what we get elsewhere in the psalm, such as at the end when he asks God again, search me and know me. If God knows, if everything's laid out, then there wouldn't really be any reason for God to like now stop and pay more attention to me and know who I really am. That there's this sort of, evolving relationship, if that's the right language. I don't know if that's how I meant to phrase it. Yeah, I see Megan says he's had a hand in the process. He knows us in and out and all around. And I say he still has a hand in the process, that God isn't just like, oh, I've made you, check that off the list, moving on, that this is a relationship that is continuous.
Yeah,
And
this is
you
the
can't separate yourself from it.
concept of creator in the Old Testament, which is slightly different from our having created some piece of artwork, right? This is the creator who sustains the
Yeah.
creation, so that our every moment and every part of our lives was not just created by God, but it is sustained by God.
Yeah.
That what makes our lives is due to God's sustaining power.
Preach.
Yeah, I'm preaching. No, you're preaching. Not so much.
But yeah, if it was just one and done, if God's like, I know everything you're going to do and I've made you and now I'm moving on, why would God need to hem you in behind and before and be there at the farthest limits of the sea if God had already finished God's work, you know?
It's like God being both spirit and breath.
Ah.
We're breathing God in all the time
Hmm.
and breathing God out, so to speak.
Mom said it's like God being both spirit and breath. We're breathing God in all the time and breathing God out, so to speak. And one last note about at the end here, verse 18, I come to the end is also sometimes translated as I awaken. It almost as if there's a shift from a kind of a dream-like state to a new way of functioning, because we're sure about to get that shift in the next line.
I'm still with you.
And even when I wake up from that dream,
Yes.
or these kinds of ruminations, these kinds of introspections, you're still with me. It's not something I was just dreaming about,
Yeah.
even though
very
it
good.
seems dreamlike.
Yes, Lorraine, you had a comment?
I thought of the idea of free will, and it is free, even if God knows how it's all going to end. And I don't even like to think about that. You know, for me, it's not like that. He's alive. He gives me free will, and it truly is free because he's not going to tell me the end of the story. I get to choose, and I get to set things up, and I can do it in his will or go off my own merry way, and wish I hadn't done that. And the other one was science doesn't bother me. Maybe I'm rationalizing it all and, you know, making it better than it is, but it doesn't bother me. Every time they find these fantastic things going on out in space, inside the body, I go, wow, that's how complicated it all is. That's getting to know God more and more. You want to take it over? We don't stand a chance. And there's still more and more we don't know. And the more we find out, we don't know. It's just absolutely, praise God. I mean, it's amazing. I find it beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very good,
I
Lorraine.
try to count them. They're more than sand. That's great, Lorraine.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
Two things there. I think you're absolutely right that because this relationship with God is one of love, characterized by care and concern, it is also one that allows us that sort of freedom, that sort of freedom that you spoke of. And yes, that's very much the reaction. Your reaction is very much, I think, the reaction of the psalmist, as Faye said, is I try to count them more than the sand. I can't do it. And that sort of reaction, which is, I think, really brings us back to another topic that I mentioned yesterday morning, which is humility and and penitence and repentance, and that is an awareness of life being more full and more complex than we can possibly take in, and so approaching individuals and problems and other people in that sort of spirit of humility, recognizing that there is so much that we don't know and don't understand. All right, so here we come to the shift that we've all been waiting for. Shall I read these verses?
Yeah, read it really sternly.
Okay. Oh, that you would kill the wicked, O God, and that the bloodthirsty would depart from me. Those who speak of you maliciously and lift themselves up against you for evil. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Yeah, those are kind of, maybe we should just skip over those and go right to prayer.
No way. I think those lines are part of what make this psalm amazing.
Well, let's hear it.
I love the fact that, yes, we can have all kinds of scholarly discussions. Was it added later or by a different kind of source or whatever? But I'm taking the psalm as it is in its final form, and the humanness that the same individual who's capable of this fantastic theological reflection on divinity and on God's compassion and knowledge is also capable of small, bitter, angry, wounded feelings, just like all of us are. And to me, that gives me hope. These last lines are lines of hope. Is it a good idea? No. Do I think that means we should all sort of try to take on this kind of hatred? No, I think that's problematic. But I think that the capital T truth here, among many capital T truths, is that we can see that humans are capable of both of these sorts of, both of these sorts of both of these are reflections that can fill us up totally, if that makes sense.
We've talked many times about how part of what makes the Bible so authentic is that it does contain these sorts of passages which convey humanity and convey that God's work is with human beings who struggle with these sorts of things. I've also talked about how Jesus quotes the Psalms more than he quoted any other book in Gospels, and it's very clear that whoever authored the Gospels had a very thorough knowledge of the Psalms, and perhaps it was these verses that were in mind when Jesus said, "You've heard it said to hate your enemies." Yeah. But I say to you to love your enemies and love those, pray for those who persecute you.
That is very, very, very difficult.
Sure is.
Yeah, it is.
Sure is. Preach it, sister.
Yeah, it's very hard to do. Perhaps there's nothing more difficult in human life than to forgive someone who has genuinely wronged you personally and painfully so.
I think the first part of the the psalm actually gives some help in that by interpreting God's relationship and by implication our own relationship to God and to others in terms of deep understanding. I think that love your enemies is certainly a very difficult thing to say and to do, but it would have to begin with the way in which love is here interpreted as having attempting to arrive at a deep understanding as to why this person whom you see as an enemy is the way that she or he is, what makes him work, how that person in fact would respond to love from someone else rather than hatred in return.
No, I think that's
what
right.
Jesus is getting at.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And that I would also say that the theological language that Jesus uses is very much tied to the language of the Psalms and the language and this
yes.
kind of love that you've spoken of.
Yeah.
And
I think we could also downgrade the word hatred down to ignore.
Ignore.
Or turn away.
Yeah, I believe that's an alternative translation.
Okay. We'll check that
Yeah,
one
that
out
would be
too.
interesting.
Yeah, that would be consistent with the idea that the worst thing you could do to someone would be to ignore them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
That's
people,
one of the things I really loved about my mom, and I come to realize it more and more as I get older, that the reason with all the problems that may have been in our life with 10 kids, she acknowledged us. And that's what I learned, is that the worst thing you can do to someone that you had some kind of good relationship with or close relationship with is then to ignore them. That would really be hateful.
I think Grace,
Rachel Faye, did you have a point to make?
I'm trying to think of exactly what I was going to open. I think this is all very current right now because there is so much division in our country, and there's so much hatred and hostility. And it's it's even harder if the person who's hurt you is right there in the room with you. But even if the person is 1,000 miles away, and you feel that this person is threatening you or threatening everything that's important to you, loving them is just, as you say, really, 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 really hard.
Yes, it
it
is.
can start with understanding.
Yes.
It helps a lot to understand.
This is maybe a tiny tangent, which I shouldn't go on because we have 2 more minutes. But when you said that, Lorraine, it reminded me of the moment in Hamlet when Ophelia is going to give the love letters back to Hamlet. And she's saying, I think it's time it looks like it's not working out. And he says, what? Well, I didn't love you. When they had, she said, but my Lord, you made me believe that you did. He's like, no, I don't remember that. I mean, it's so cruel. And it's just this sort of shift that happens. I'm totally digressing. Let's get on with the prayer. I'm sorry.
No, that's a really good example of how
hurtful.
Of how hatred works. All right. Thank you all so much for your comments and questions and responses. We'll now take prayer requests. We do have a prayer for the Escabel family, which is Andrew Olson's in-laws. His wife's uncle has passed away just recently, and so let's remember the Escabel family. Are there other requests? Let's continue to pray for our country and for our leaders that they will do the right thing.
Yes.
Yes.
Any other prayer requests? Okay.
Patrick, could you repeat the one that I think it was John Olson had it? Could you repeat that again?
That is the Escabel family.
Oh, okay.
Esquibel.
Say it again.
Esquibel.
Escabel. Oh, okay, got it. Escabel.
Mom, you had a prayer request?
I have a much beloved friend named Adele.
Oh,
Who
Adele.
has cancer.
Adele, who
And
has
so
cancer.
does her companion.
And her husband.
And it would be very, very hard to lose her. And I feel as though it would be a calamity for the world because she's just has been a great fighter for justice and peace.
She's a good person.
And I couldn't quite hear that.
This is Gracia Faye's friend, Adele, is battling cancer. And
Oh.
she asked for prayer for Adele and Adele's husband. All right, let's close with prayer. Eternal God, we are so grateful to have opportunities to come together in faith, to worship, but also to study the Bible and to lift one another up in prayer and love and support and encouragement. And so we come now to bring the family of Escabel family related to Andrew Olson's wife, and we ask that you would bring comfort and care and encouragement to that family, give them strength to love one another in this difficult time. We ask that you would be with Andrew and his wife, give them the courage and the strength that they need to get through this very difficult challenge. We pray for all of those who are experiencing death now due to the virus. We ask that you would bring healing and quicken the vaccination process that will help us to move beyond this terrible pandemic. Pray for those who've suffered financially from the pandemic and all of the challenges and struggles that is presented for so many families. And we ask that you'd help us to know how to best support and love the people that have been so unfortunately affected. We pray for our nation. We are concerned about violence and concerned about the level of hate that we see displayed in social media and on television. And we ask, Lord, that you would bring wisdom and strength and courage to the political leaders in both our state and our nation, that they would speak out of love and with authority in order to bring peace, a just peace that is pleasing to you. We ask, Lord, that you would heal Gracia Faye's friend Adele. We thank you so much for her life and all that she has meant to Gracia Faye and to so many others. We ask that you would give her strength, that you would give her courage and comfort to her husband as they try to deal with this battle with cancer. We pray for those who are taking care of her, and we pray for her healing. We ask all of these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, Patrick,
Yes.
something else. I'm sorry, but the homeless situation. I see young people. They look, some of them like teens, walking past my door, walking down Gibbs, nearly past my door. People with mental issues going on. You can tell on the underpass. It's awful.
Yeah, the homeless situation in Pomona is and other parts of California is pretty bad.
Yeah, we'll keep that in.
And we'll keep these folks in our prayers and
Yes.
pray for the church that will know how to continue to try to respond to this problem. Thank you, Sue, for joining us. Sue saying goodbye. Thank you, others who are on Facebook and Zoom and YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And
Thank
please,
you for all of your insights, so I can steal them and use them for Sunday.
yeah, you might recognize some things said on Sunday morning during worship as Faye is preaching. And so please join us again on one of these platforms on Zoom or YouTube or Facebook so you can catch Faye's sermon this Sunday.
And thank you, John, and thank you, Megan. Bye, guys.
Bye, John and Megan. Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Bye, Mom and Dad.
Bye,
You're still
y'all.
on.
Thank you for the whole family, for everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Patrick, and thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Guadalupe.
Good to hear your
Bye-bye.
voice.
Oh, God.
Bye-bye. Thank you.